Good afternoon, everyone. This is the third session, or let us say the second day of our refresher course, the fourth session of this course. This is the 14th refresher course in political science. Today we have again another student of mine. Today is the day of my students, and this is Dr. Pradeep Sharma. I do not remember the year in which he was a student. I think it should be somewhere around 2004 or 5. Pradeep, if I'm wrong?
No, it was
or maybe earlier.
It was 1994.
Okay, it was 1994. Sanjay was my student as early as in 1990. So now Pradeep Sharma is the head Center for Globalization and Development Studies, University of Allahabad. He is done his MA and PhD from JNU. He is a associate professor here. He has visited many foreign countries. He has written extensively on national and international journals. His area of specialization is globalization and the impact of globalization on modern India. I would also like to inform you that Pradeep's lecture was scheduled tomorrow, but he has really helped us out in a crisis because the resource person today suddenly fell ill and could not deliver the lecture. So at the last minute, I requested Pradeep that if he is prepared, he could kindly deliver the lecture, which he readily agreed, perhaps because he thinks I'm his teacher and his teacher should not be in a crisis at any point. So thank you, Pradeep. You have given me my Guru Dakshina, and
My pleasure.
and I'm sure you are going to enjoy his lecture for the simple reason that I heard his lecture in another center, in another platform, and I found that he was very informative and he had given a lot of new insights to this topic. So I will not take up much of your time, and I will request Pradeep to kindly deliver his lecture. Pradeep, try to be bilingual because there are people from South India and places who cannot understand Hindi.
Okay. So as I said, thank you very much. And the topic of my lecture is globalization and development in India, with a special reference to India at 75. And I have categorized my lecture in 6 parts. And the first 2 parts deals with the meaning and scope of globalization and development. And the third deals with the dynamics of globalization and development, with a special reference to India since independence. And the fourth will deal with India's trajectory of development after independence. And the last section is about challenges and current patterns and trends of development in contemporary India. This is how I have categorized my lecture. So in terms of meanings and scope of globalization, see, globalization is such a word. हिंदी में भी बता दूंगा, कुछ मैसेजेस आ रहे हैं तो आप परेशान मत होइए, मैं हिंदी में भी बता दूंगा. आवाज सबको साफ आ रही है अब?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is better now.
Okay. Thank you. As far as the meanings and scope of globalization is concerned, see, globalization is used in a very loose as well as in intellectual and academic sense. In the loose sense, the word of globalization, इसके बहुत सारे शब्द हैं. कुछ लोग इसको भूमंडलीकरण कहते हैं, कुछ लोग इसको वैश्वीकरण कहते हैं, और भी इसके बहुत सारे नाम हैं. और हिंदुस्तान में तो हम लोग इसको कहते हैं कि हमारे लिए तो वैश्वीकरण की प्रक्रिया कोई ऐसी नई नहीं है, क्योंकि हम तो वैदिक परंपरा से ही वसुधैव कुटुंबकम जैसी परिकल्पनाओं से अपना ज्ञान वर्धन करते रहे हैं और ये मानते रहे हैं कि पूरा विश्व हमारा एक कुटुंब है और उसमें हम सौहार्द और भाईचारे से रहकर एक दूसरे की मदद कर आगे बढ़ सकते हैं. But the way globalization has been seen in last say around 200 years of global history, it has evolved as an intellectual and academic discourse as well. There are different meanings of the term, both for the countries of South as well as the countries of the North. For the countries of the South, globalization is seen as an opportunity, but opportunity for development, opportunities for connecting with the developed worlds. But for the North, the meaning of globalization is deeply associated with, say, last 200 years history of colonialism as well. Because the process of colonization is also seen in somewhat manner as globalization. So it is highly complex and intertwined concept, and globalization has different meanings for different people. For the lay person, it could be just a very closer, harmonious idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. But for the policymakers, if policymakers are sitting in the north or sitting in the south, then the meaning and the scope of the term is completely different. So in that sense, it is highly complex and difficult idea, and academically it has been defined in different manners by different scholars. I won't go into definitions and scope of globalization, but there are at least three schools of globalization intellectually. The first school, what we call as the liberal school, that considers globalization is deeply associated with trade and commerce, and to what I also call as highly economy-driven globalization. The second school considers is as largely the progressive, the to some extent we may include some neo-Marxist in that sense also, where they considers that the globalization as a process is also an opportunity for the working class people globally to express their solidarity and to transform world into more egalitarian and more equitable manner. So in this sense, but one thing is very clear that globalization is seen as a reality. Some considers it also as a myth. Like if we think about David Hill's argument or Anthony Giddens' argument, then in some of their writings, they considered that globalization is nothing new. It has been taking places since ages. And they considered that trade has been an integral part of the globalization process. And if I also look back, then in Asiatic countries, we had the Silk Route, the famous Silk Route, starting from the Chinese territory, going through Middle East, and then going up to Europe. So then globalization is not simply a matter of myth. Globalization is also reality, but reality is a process, and that process also as of the trade and commerce. Globalization with policy making, globalization of political processes, globalization of political ideas is somewhat a very new and I'll say a recent phenomena. So in that sense, last 200 years of history of globalization, as we see, is driven by economic centric process of trade and commerce, where it is considered that the nation state should have some sort of flexible or some sort of a very universal or uniform types of terms and conditions for rapid and smooth transaction of goods and commodities. And after communication revolutions, services also has been included in that. So I think one thing is very clear, that last 200 years history of socio-political and economic forces that demonstrates that the globalization as a process, but process of trade and commerce, and especially after WTO, it is being also considered as the globalization of commodities and services, goods, commodities, and services. So, in that sense, it is very crucial to understand that globalization is impacting our daily lives right from, say, from the cradle to grave. And in these last, say, around 50 years of development, and with increase of communication revolution, especially the information technology revolution, this process has been intensified. The process of exchange of goods, commodities, and services. इसको मैं थोड़ा सा हिंदी में बता देता हूं अपने हिंदी भाषी साथियों के लिए कि जो वैश्वीकरण की प्रक्रिया है उसको कोई बहुत सामान्य अर्थों में बहुत नया नहीं माना गया है। जैसा मैंने पहले ही कहा कि हम वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की परंपरा से भी चलते आए हैं, लेकिन ऐतिहासिक परिप्रेक्ष्य में भी ये माना जाता है कि ग्लोबलाइजेशन, भूमंडलीकरण मुख्यतः वो व्यापार और ट्रेड एंड कॉमर्स से के माध्यम से निर्धारित होता आया है। इसका एक बहुत पुराना उदाहरण सिल्क रूट भी दिया जाता है कि सिल्क रूट में भी, लेकिन जो दूसरे स्कूल ऑफ थॉट है वो मानते हैं कि ग्लोबलाइजेशन एक औपनिवेशिक प्रोसेस भी है, जिसमें कॉलोनियलिज्म के साथ साथ जहां पर पहले व्यापार पर, पहले उन कॉलोनीज की जो अर्स्टवाइल कॉलोनीज थी उनकी अर्थव्यवस्था पर, उनके व्यापार पर नियंत्रण कर और एक बहुत ही असामान्य सी स्थिति, इनइक्विटेबल, जिसमें एक समानता पर आधारित व्यापार और समझौते नहीं हो रहे थे, उन चीजों को मानकर लागू करने की बात भी की गई। लेकिन पिछले 50 वर्षों का यदि हम इतिहास देखें तो उसके अंदर खास तौर से संचार क्रांति ने बहुत सारी चीजों को परिवर्तित करते हुए एक और प्रक्रिया को उसमें जोड़ा, जिसमें सेवाओं में भी बहुत सारा भूमंडलीकरण देखने को मिलता रहा है। वो सिर्फ सामानों में या व्यापार सिर्फ सामानों में हो रहा हो या कमोडिटी में हो रहा हो, ऐसा ही नहीं रहा। और खासतौर से 50 वर्षों में सेवाओं में, और यदि अभी हिंदुस्तान पर मैं अभी आऊंगा, भारत में किस तरह से सेवाओं का जो भूमंडलीकरण हुआ है और उससे भारत के ऊपर क्या असर पड़ा, वो दूसरे सेक्शन में मैं उसको थोड़ा सा टच करने की कोशिश करूंगा। तो इस तरीके से यदि ग्लोबलाइजेशन को मैं समझूं तो एक प्रक्रिया है, साथ ही साथ जो communication with the advent of the communication revolution and with the increase of the communication revolution, it has also led to knowledge sharing, particularly in the field of technology sharing, कि हम नई नई टेक्नोलॉजी को किस तरह से शेयर करते हैं और एक दूसरे के साथ कैसे दो देश या दो संस्थाएं या दो ग्रुप्स वो किस तरीके से उनको आगे ले जाने की कोशिश करते हैं। At the same time, especially in last 50 years, globalization also has been seen as the process of solidarity for social transformation. And especially with the social movements and of the new social movement, I'm sure, since all of us are from political science background, that issue is specific global social movement, which affects globally, like say the movements of the Greens in Germany, or of the indigenous people of Australian Aborigines or the Brazilian Amazonians. So globalization is also seen as the process of solidarity to bring transformation in society, which at least has two major principles, two major values as their reference point. The principles of equality and the principles of human dignity. The fourth is that the globalization has also posed, especially in last 50 years, has posed challenges to the very concept of the nation state. That, and this is a very interesting debate, that whether globalization has affected the idea of nation state, or now is it blurring the territorial boundaries of the nation state, as well as the boundaries, as well as the governance of the nation state, of the particular nation state. So these are some of the multi-dimensional aspects of globalization. That globalization primarily is seen as a process, a historical process, also seen as knowledge sharing, and also seen as the process of solidarity for bringing up the social transformation, and globalization as a challenge to the idea of nation state. Now coming to the development. Conceptually, the development also has at least means, to my understanding, and that's what I have worked out for this lecture, that development in the developing society has to be traced back at least since the end of the Second World War. During the decades of the Second World War, that is 1940s, at least two processes were going simultaneously. One was, and that too particularly in the countries of Asia and Africa. One very important process that was undergoing was the process of decolonization. And with the decolonization, a corroborative process was also how to rebuild the erstwhile colonies. विकास का भी जो बहस है उसको भी हम कम से कम वो भी मल्टी डायमेंशनल है, और उसको भी हम इस प्रकार से देखते हैं, खास तौर से विकसित देशों में उसको समझने के लिए कम से कम जो द्वितीय विश्व युद्ध है वहां तक जाने की जरूरत पड़ेगी। और ये समझना होगा कि द्वितीय विश्व युद्ध के दशक के दौरान 1950-1940 के दशक के दौरान दो प्रक्रियाएं साथ ही साथ चल रही थी। एक प्रक्रिया जो डीकोलोनाइजेशन की प्रक्रिया थी, जिसमें जो पुरानी कॉलोनीज थी जैसे भारत, जैसे जापान, श्रीलंका या अफ्रीका में बहुत सारे देश, वो अपने अर्स्टवाइल कॉलोनियल मास्टर से आजादी पा रहे थे, जैसे भारत ने भी 1947 में आजादी पाई। लेकिन उसी के साथ साथ में दूसरी प्रक्रिया भी महत्वपूर्ण हो रही थी कि जो नए, जो न्यूली फ्री कंट्रीज थे लाइक इंडिया, उनके सामने विकास की, इस तरह के सारे देशों के सामने अपने देशों के विकास को आगे बढ़ाने की, विकास को खड़ा करने की, विकास को शुरू से करने की, बिल्कुल जीरो से शुरू करने की वो प्रक्रियाएं भी, वो चुनौतियां भी उनके सामने थी। And with this, the third important concept that is clubbed with this, that is the concept of democracy. That how these newly free countries, free unquote unquote free countries, they are whether going to embrace democratic structure of government and governance, or they are choosing some other ways of governance and government. And but at the same time, what happened in 1950s, particularly in the mid 1950s onwards, that the world also divided into the blocks, to what, as a student of political science, we call as the beginning of the Cold War. And Cold War actually impacted the entire course of the second half of the 20th century, where there were two blocks. I won't go into the history of the Cold War, just to remind you that there were two blocks, one block led by the United States of America, and the second block that was led by the erstwhile USSR. And it was a very serious, a very polarized kind of politics, which actually impacted on the development. Why do I bring Cold War here? Because the dynamics of Cold War, in fact, impacted on the development of these erstwhile colonies. Either we take example of the Southeast Asian countries, or few countries in Africa, like say Kenya. South Africa came a bit later, but other countries like Mozambique, or even the French colonies of say Mali. So it actually impacted on the very developmental course of these colonies. That's why, to understand the dynamics of Cold War, it is very important that how dynamics of Cold War impacted on the development of these erstwhile colonies. So with this background, I just move to the dynamics of globalization and development in India. That how these two major dynamics, the concept of globalization, and the need and necessities of development, especially immediately after independence in India. And I see India's development at least in five parts since independence. And the first I have devised as part immediately after independence from 1947 with the declaration of emergency in our country, that was in 1975. So this period of roughly around of 28 years is so crucial to understand that how the developmental trajectory of our country immediately after independence that progressed. The second I have developed is the period of 1975 to 1980. These 5 year period was so tumultuous, so dynamic, so interesting. Now, interesting, I am saying now as a student, as an academic, that the study of these 5 years actually brings us to this understanding that how these 5 years shaped the very political governance structure of our country as well as the economic governance structure of our country. The third phase that I've developed is the phase falling between 1980 to 1991. And 1991, I'm sure everyone is aware of, when our new economic policy that was introduced, and India moved away from what was called as the license Raj to the open economy. And from 1991, the fourth phase, from 1991 to 2010, where we started to implement the new economic policy and got connected with the other economies, of course, the European Union as well as the United States, and the economies of Latin America, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. And also we started to at least experience, if I can't use the word achievements, but we started to experience some benefits of the new economic policy and our connectedness with the other economies, with the outside economy. The last period, which is the current period undergoing on, I just consider it since 2010 onwards till date. So I'll just focus on the dynamics of globalization and development in these
सर आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही है शायद सर का माइक म्यूट हो गया ऐसा लगता है
Or we have lost.
जी जी सर जी
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes,
You
sir.
are
आवाज आ रही
audible.
है, sir आपकी.
ओके, आई थिंक
आ
देयर
रही है
वाज
आवाज सर.
कोई कनेक्शन की इश्यू था, या मुझे लगता है कुछ ज्यादा फोन क्राउडेड हो गया, मतलब नंबर ऑफ पार्टिसिपेंट्स. सो ना, सॉरी फॉर दिस. ओके, सो I was just discussing our challenges immediately after independence. And I consider there were at least three major challenges which had greater impact on our developmental course. The first one was immediately keeping India territorially intact. That was one of the biggest challenges immediately after independence. The second was also how to restore our communal harmony after the worst communal riots that India witnessed in the history of humankind. And the third was which administrative and governmental structure that India has to adopt. And as now we see that India adopted democratic structure of government, or what we call as the constitutional democracy that we adopted, and we are practicing it for last 75 years very successfully. And the fourth challenge was, of course, that was the economic challenge, because after immediately the end of colonialism in 1947, rebuilding India economically was one of the biggest challenges that any erstwhile colonies experiences. So, and this is how all these four major challenges had greater impact on our developmental discourse. Today, looking back after 75 years, we consider that we could have been done better. But critically, if we analyze, we understand that, or I understand that these first two challenges, that the keeping territorial integrity of India and restoring communal harmony, had greater impact on our developmental trajectory, on our developmental discourse. Of course, because we were highly resource crunched, and there were no resources. We had to borrow. In between, the Cold War also began. So, and India adopted the policy of non-alignment. So it was a very complex situation, or if I may use this a very popular phrase of catch 2020, that how that we can't go either to one block or to another block, as our position on Ukraine contemporary has been held worldwide. And India was very instrumental in the last G20 meeting, very instrumental to bring out, I'll say, a very neutral statement. So that policy demonstrates that how India's diplomacy, or how India's position that takes place in such challenging and difficult times, where one is asked to just pitch against another. But India's diplomacy has always been so balanced and so neutral, that how we just consider the entire concept of global solidarity, not from only the one lens, but from, say, prism of humanity, where we considers everyone as one, together, going together, and believing in dialogue and discussion, and then coming out to a consensus or to a feasible solutions. So the India actually, as far as the third challenge, that is adoption of the constitutional democracy, I think it has been one of the best decisions that any erstwhile colonies would have taken, where we had one of the best constitutions in the world till date, a written constitution in the world, and which is considered as the masterpiece of constitutional governance, and where means many countries did not have universal adult suffrage, despite being claiming them as the mother of democracy, or the doyens of democracy, or the torchbearers of democracy, India in one go adopted for universal adult suffrage, one vote, one weight. So this is something that this was the vision of our constitutional makers, that how in one go they believed that India, or the coming generations of India immediately after independence, would understand it, that how one vote, one weight has impacted on the political development of our governance of our society. And after 5 years of our independence, they have proved absolutely right. Their vision, their dream, that how universal adult suffrage will have impact on the political development of our country. So, and coming to the fourth one, the economic challenges, these are very enormous ones. An enormous one, as we know, that if we go by economic parameters or economic indicators, then the GDP, as usually we consider, that the Indian GDP as at the time of independence and today's GDP, that how challenging it was. And but India at least adopted a mixed economy model, which was focusing on larger, a mass scale developmental trajectory. Mass scale, like when India adopted the concept of green revolution. That was for that how India could be food independent rather than being food dependent country, how India as a society could become food independent. And definitely by the end of the 1970s decade, India was largely food independent society, with, of course, green revolution and other measures, like say white revolution, or what we call as Amul experiment. So that was making more India, not in terms of food independence, but also that how India should have nutritious food, the nutrient value of our country, or to our children. That was the focus, that how it could be developed, how we can also become India not only food independent, but also nutritious food independent. But I think at the same time, the political development, they were also shaping the economic development of our country. So, because we can't, as a student of political science or political economy, we can't distinguish, we can't just bifurcate strictly from political or economic development. But 1975 was actually a very important year, or one of the most important years in last 75 years of our country, where we witnessed the declaration of emergency, which transformed not only the policy structure of our country, but also the socio-cultural fabric of our country, of our society. So this is how we understand that how the declaration of emergency had impact, multidimensional impact on our economy, politics, and cultural discourse of our society. But we know that immediately after its declaration, within 2.5 years or a bit more, the Indian society bounced back and heavily protested against it, and led to another kind of new openings in politics. That was the politics of coalition. So the period of coalition, though we understand as political science student, we understand that the coalition period started sometime in 1990s. But in fact, if we just go back, so the first experiment one of the first experiments in this regard was in 1977, when, as against the emergency, Indian politics, through a new kind of understanding, a new kind of politics, that this kind of emergency provisions are not acceptable to the Indian society or to the Indian population, and a new politics emerged. And that's a different story, that it was short-lived, but it had greater impact on the political minds and the political culture of our country. So 1980 to 1991 is a different period. Is a different period in the sense that it experienced at least three major processes. One process was the process of what we call as the terrorism, where or secessionism. एक प्रक्रिया हम ये समझते हैं कि उस समय आतंकवाद या जो अलगाववाद की बातें थी, वो उस दशक में बहुत समय तक रही, चाहे हमने पंजाब में देखा हो, असम में देखा हो, कश्मीर में देखा हो, जिसका हमारे पूरे विकास की धारा पर, विकास के क्रम पर बहुत गहरा असर पड़ा। और लेकिन साथ ही साथ हमने इकोनॉमिक ओपनिंग अप भी देखी। हालांकि हम ये मानते हैं बहुत मोटा मोटी तरीके से कि 1991 के बाद से हम ओपन इकोनॉमी के चीज फ्रेमवर्क में आना हमने शुरू कर दिया था, लेकिन इसकी शुरुआत 1980 से ही हो गई थी और बहुत कोर सेक्टर से हुई थी। वो चाहे खदान के सेक्टर रहे हों, चाहे कोयले के सेक्टर रहे हों, उन सेक्टर से शुरू हुई थी। छोटी शुरुआत थी, लेकिन उसकी शुरुआत 1980-1981 के समय से ही हो गई थी। और उसके बाद चूंकि अलगाववाद और आतंकवाद की घटनाओं से देश और विकास का क्रम बहुत गहरे रूप से प्रभावित रहा था, और उसका असर हमारे पॉलिसी निर्माण पर भी बहुत गहरे रूप से पड़ा था। इसलिए उस क्रम में हम ये पाते हैं, उस दौर में, खासतौर से 1985 से 1990 के क्रम में, कि उसने हमारे विकास की धारा को किस तरह से प्रभावित किया। एंड इन दिस सेंस the 1991 was a watershed year, and I may use this term watershed year, where India had, and that was one of the biggest, I think, policy mechanisms, decisions that Indian policymakers undertook, which had greater impact, had impact till date on both the politics and economy of our country, leading to the impact on society as well. And everyone knows what happened in 1991, a new economic policy that was introduced, and which popularly is known that from license Raj to open economy. And but at the same time, now see the dynamics, the intertwining relationship of politics and economy, that how the coalition governments, the coalition politics that was happening and having impact on Indian economy. So many people consider that it was a politically volatile period in our country, and they said that some people call it also politically, but some of the best economic decisions, if we just go back, were taken during this period only. And as we know, the best decisions are taken during the crisis period of any society. And of course, we know that Indian economy was in one of the greatest crises that it witnessed in 1991 or during the period of 1990s. And it also, but at the same time, it responded with one of the finest policy frameworks that India adopted, India as a country, as a government that adopted, which had greater impact till date. So the developmental discourse that transformed, but by 2000 onwards, this somewhat limited benefit of open economy, those also started saturating, and they left a greater, they also impact on our developmental discourse and demonstrated some sort of limitations of new economic framework of 1991. And this limitation or these limitations led to a new kind of politics, which we are experiencing today, politics and economy, which we are, of course, not with very fundamental shift from that, but a new kind of direction that is required for the political development, for the economic development of our country. And as such, if I can just um, sum up it, India after independence, especially in terms of political economy, then the major debates that we experienced immediately after independence, that was the debate what I call is of debate of developmentalism. That what is our developmental framework? And this is one of the biggest controversial, most debated, highly contested idea, the entire discourse of developmentalism. That what should be the quote unquote right framework for India's development. The policymaker of 1950s and 60s, whatever we call as the Nehruvian policy makers, they considered that the country which has recently emerged out of colonialism, experienced communal riots, one of the worst communal riots, got fractured independence, require a very fundamental, deep-rooted, mass-scale developmental paradigm. After 1980s and especially after 1991, this paradigm shifted to a sector-based, what we call as sectoral developmental paradigm, sector-based kind of paradigm, where they understood that we have to focus on certain sectors for the entire all India economic growth. And this actually led to the limitations of this sectoral approach of development, because India by late 90s or early 2000 focused more on services rather than on manufacturing. And by 2010 or by 2015, the entire service sector saturated, clubbed with the recession in the United States of 2008. So we experienced the saturation of sector-focused developmental approach and required new thinking, new kind of political economy thinking, where we need to emphasize more on manufacturing and equally, if not entirely, but equally on services and other sectors. So a very holistic, a very new kind of economic thinking has to undergo, is being undergoing in our country, that how to bring back not only the fundamental shift in our economy, as well as in the political economy discourse, and the entire framework of development that also is undergoing a new thinking. The second debate that I considered, which has greater impact on our this dynamics of globalization and development, that is of the secularism. And this has been a very fundamental debate of our country immediately after independence of last 75 years. But we need to country which is coming out of the communal rights, the worst communal rights, and experiencing economic development with all limitations, with all inconsistencies, is leading to a new kind of debate on the concept of secularism. Because as we know, why secularism is needed in our country, just by the very nature of our society. Our society is multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-cuisine. So it won't be pragmatic, it won't be prudent if we just say it won't be that secularism is irrelevant. I think it would be a very innocent kind of argument, because secularism is inbuilt in our social fabric. It is a different issue that which side of secularism we take. but secularism is an integral part of our Indian social structure, of our Indian social fabric. Just because of its nature, because of our diverse, because of our multitude varieties, race, ethnicity, food, costume, languages, you just name any kind of varieties and we have. So, and I think a simple term, secularism, when I'm just using the term secularism, I'm not using the term only in terms of religion, but secularism in terms of harmonious social fabrics. The third important debate, that is of the constitutionalism, that how constitutionalism has greater impact on both on our society and on our economy. And is enough of political freedom as devoid of economic freedom, as we know that Harold Lasky, when he says that political freedom remains incomplete without economic freedom. So how the entire lifestyle of constitutionalism, that constitutionalism as a way of life, constitutional government with rule of law, how they are shaping our developmental paradigm, how they have greater impact, whether this is more selective or this is more universal, this is more consensus based or this is highly contested. So all these in last 75 years, we have experienced all types of debates on constitutionalism and how constitutionalism and the watershed years were, of course, of 1975, where they understood that how Indian democracy has inbuilt tendency of bouncing back. That how if emergency provisions are anti-people, are not accepted with the larger population, so how the same population can just protest against it and restore the rule of law or the democratic fabric of our country. So in terms of, these are the major debates of last 75 years that I consider are important just to discuss, and major discourses that how India as a civilization, that is being seen, that how we see India as a civilization and the entire understanding or reimagining India, that is also undergoing. It was there when we were talking in 1950s or 60s. We were saying nation building. That how nation building that has to be done. That how nation has to be built, has to be rebuilt. So the concept of nation building was there, and with 1980s, the new generation that was coming up with demographic changes by 80s in India. And also by the turn of the millennium, that also happened, that how the entire reimagination of India as a civilization, not only India as a democratic country, but India as a civilization, that will have greater impact. That's why the entire studies on focus on cultural studies, on ethnographies, on anthropological studies, on sociological studies, that have greater impact and has led to a new design of India, and also having more and more deeper understanding and reinterpretation with this concept of new India. So this is the kind of volatile relationship between democracy, development, and globalization. But there are also important major practices that India has experienced during last 75 years. And the most important practice is that I consider is important to mention here is the practice of this idea, which is a constitutional idea as well as a guarantee, that is of the freedom of expression. That how with this political freedom, this freedom of expression that is being articulated, that is being shaped. Is it okay? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so just to reconfirm. Yeah, just to reconfirm. I'm just
Yes,
just
sir.
to re
Carry on, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So the major practice that in during last 75 years that India witnessed, that is this very imaginative, real constitutional guarantee, freedom of expression guarantee, but which is more imaginative, which is more expressive, uh, but which is also contested, a deeply contested concept of freedom of expression. And this freedom of expression actually is not only the India challenge. This is a global challenge. And that's why I thought just to mention here, because and globally, if you consider, during last last 40 years, most contested, most debatable freedom. That freedom is not, as we know, everywhere in the world, all freedom restrictions, as in our country, in our constitution also, freedom comes with certain restrictions, which are legal restrictions, which are reasonable restrictions. So in that sense, excuse me. So in that sense, it is pertinent to mention that freedoms, because freedom of expression shapes your both the political, cultural, and political freedoms, economic freedoms. And because freedom of expression is not only in terms of spoken freedoms, but just freedom to think. And when we say freedom to think, is not only that I can think, oh, or I can have some kind of platonic thinking, realistic to think, where thinking is enabled by a very motivating environment. Governance or the social fabric is able to provide us that freedom and that autonomy, where I as an individual, we as a group, or we as a society, or we as the people of India, that we are able to express, because this freedom has at least two aspects. One is the enabling environment provided by these agencies and social functions. Second is its expression. And I think these are a global challenge all over the world. We see in United States, we see in Europe, we see in Middle East, we see it in Russia, we see it in China. So it's not something very that it is limited to our country. So it's not like that. But because it is important to mention here that why it is important, because it impacts on the very developmental framework of our society, of any society. If whether this is freedom of expression in economy, or in culture, or in politics. The second important practice, which is important also to mention, which I thought is important to mention, that India at 75, how I look back, I think this practice of eradicating poverty and food security, that is equally important. That how India as a nation is able to, because if in 1947 we started with this much, and how poverty has been eradicated, whether in this we find that in India, especially in last 30 years or so, or if I may use this 1991 milestone also. So in that sense, it is important whether we are able to bridge this hiatus, the gap between the rich and poor. And this equitable redistribution of wealth, which is there in our constitution, which is the constitutional vision, it is not something only a socialist or a Marxist idea. It is there in our constitution that how there could be an equitable economic and social development. So whether in last 75 years we are able to develop such mechanisms and such policy frameworks and also practices, that this gap between rich and poor, or the super rich and the worst poor, I can't use the word super poor, but super rich is fine, but one of the worst poor that we find in our countries, maybe in say Odisha regions of Kalahandi, or in Koraput, or in I'll say in early 1990s, these were the regions in Palamu and other areas, or in worst regions in western Rajasthan. So these pockets, the pockets of chronic and worst poverty, that whether we are able to just bridge this gap. So it's not about only middle class story or Indian middle class story that the growth is leading. But at an all India level, India is like almost like a continent, means by its geography and by its population. So, and if we find these chronic poverty areas, so as I said, of KBK, of Bolangir, Kalahandi, and Keraput, or in Palamu, or in western Rajasthan, or in the upper Himalayas, of entire Himalayan range of all 6 states. So this remains one of the biggest challenges, that how to bridge this gap. The second important practices that I just mentioned about green revolution, which was introduced with this vision that how India become from food dependent to food independent country. But again, with increase of the population and resource crunches, this has become one of the biggest challenges, that how to remain food secure country. How, especially with this more and more trade and commerce, and especially with the introduction of the genetically modified crops, that how this food security debate and practice that impacts on, because no one will disagree that any country is not considered developed if it remains food insecure. Any food insecure country, forget about country, but even your household, your village, your city, those are insecure if they do not remain food insecure. So this is something very fundamental. This is something very basic for human survival, for human dignity. So food security remains one of the biggest challenges, and with increase in the population and the new demand of late, and in fact in this India has been quite I'll say visionary. The third practice, that is of the climate change, not the practice, but the debate is of the climate change, which is having greater impact on our developmental trajectory. That how the climate change debates are there, but climate change as a fact is there also. So having said this, and why I say that India has been visionary in this, because right from 1972, with the Stockholm Convention, India was saying that we need to do something, we need to do something, we need to do something. And India is a developing country. So it was not that India was not alarming the world about dangers of climate change, but it was not within the capacity, or within the, it was there as a policy framework, but it was not within the capacity of India as a developing nation, as a developing countries, as an erstwhile colony, to just focus on climate change. But the biggest, I'll say biggest defaulters of climate change were, of course, European Union and United States. So it's a very power game kind of thing, that how those who were the defaulters are now advocating those who were the beneficiaries or the least polluters to do maximum for undoing the damages of the climate change. So this is a kind of very unequal argument, no? That how the biggest defaulters asking the least polluters to do the maximum for curbing the damages of the climate change. So even academically or conceptually, this is a very unequal argument. But India has been visionary, because either in 1972 or in 1980 or even after that, India has been a party to the COP, to all COPs, recently 27, COP 27 that held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Cairo. So it was also one of the biggest practices. Now, just briefly, that how development is also affected, and this is something very contemporary I have taken as, that is the role of media, because media, why I put it in this lecture, so it is important because media is also now the global media. Now we of course we have vernacular media and all that, but with this social media or new social media has greater impact on our mindset as well as on our policy formation. That's why I thought that I'll just flag upon these issues in terms of media, the role of media, and that how media is understood, which is a global media, and I'm talking about global media. So here I've just used two major narratives of global media. One as is called as the liberal narrative of global media, and second as the populist narrative of global media. In terms of liberal media narrative, media is seen as a democratizing tool. That media is considered that media would be instrumental in democratization processes. And it is also considered that media will have these four parameters to set for itself, that this is how we will self-regulate or govern ourselves. And the first and foremost parameters is considered in this liberal school is considered as the promotion or as the faith or is as advocating for the constitutional government. That this liberal discourse, this liberal narrative focuses on that media should focus on constitutional government. The second important parameter is considered as that media should also focus on rule of law, on ensuring the rule of law. And I don't have to explain all these individual concepts, as all of us are political sciences students. So we know, and rule of law, right from dicey till current, we are teaching to our students, and we are ourselves getting enlightened in that sense. And third liberal school also considered as media as development of, means advocating for development of modern party system. This is a kind of British edition in this narrative, where they consider a British or Anglo-British edition, where they considered as that media should not become party spokesperson, but certainly because the modern political party system is being reorganized. It's not that because history of party system is very new, not even say around 200 years. Roughly now we can say 200 years. So it's very recent. The history of party system, modern party system, is very, very recent. And so, but this school considers that party system as a system, media should focus on as a system, not on particular parties. So this is, and the fourth parameter this liberal school considered as that media should always focus on propagation of democracy, the idea of democracy and the practice of democracy. Whereas the populist narrative is seen as, and this also, I think this has around history of around roughly around 100 years, globally 100 years, where they considered that media always either manufactures or generate or imagined a villain. That there has to be a villain. There's a very populist narrative. And this villain could be in any domain, in cultural, in social, in political, in economic, in anthropological, in any domains of human life, that there has to be a villain, the idea of villain. And as against the idea of villain, there also has to be an idea of hero or heroines or herodom. So that is also, and these are both, as the critiques of liberal school, they say that these are both the promotion of the neoliberal market forces. That because this suits you, because in the pro-liberal market, there has to be cutthroat competition. So one product has to be seen better or worse as against the other product. So the idea of villain product. So the populist media, and this product could be any emergency, this product could be any commodity, this product could be any economic commodity, political commodity, cultural practices. So this has to be, and this is deeply aided by the entire culture of consumerism. That how increasing practice of consumerism, that, and why did I bring this in this lecture? Because the global media has greater impact on our policy framework. That's why, which was not the case, say, during 1940s or 50s. Global media was informed. It was not so that media was not there. Though it was not electronic media or social media, but of course print media and electronic media in terms of radio and other devices were there in 1950s and 60s, and they had greater impact. But this new social media and the populist media, the populist narrative that I just highlighted, has a global presence. So it's not, and it has greater impact on global mind. So it's not that X country or Y country, it is there everywhere. And these two types of medias have greater impact on our policy framework. When I say policy framework, that I consider as the developmentalism, the development framework. Someone is writing that he or she is not getting the audio. Is it okay now?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clearly.
Please continue,
Yes,
sir.
okay, thank you. So someone wrote, so I just thought just to pick it up. Okay, now coming to the last part of my lecture, that is of the challenges and patterns of development and globalization. In terms of challenges and pattern, the first and foremost challenge is of before this, what I call as developmentalism. I think the biggest challenge that we have in India is on this development frame is what I call as growth versus environment. That growth versus environment, which I considered, that how we definitely need, we as developing country and as a new society, as erstwhile colonial society, development is our perennial, is our necessity. So there is no second thought about it. But development at which cost, particularly vis-a-vis environment. I just touched upon change, and India has been a visionary in alarming, in flagging out the challenges which would be posed by the climate change, and now we see so how we balance between our developmentalism and our growth, the necessity, the need for growth and environment. Now, this is a very serious, it's not that just I'm highlighting it. It is a very serious challenge before policymakers, before particularly the development policymakers. That how, because otherwise for economists or for political economy expert, He or she considers growth number, GDP, per capita income, as the end of it. But the per capita income, see, the example that I gave of KBK. KBK is a region in Orissa, the 3 districts of Kalahandi, Bolangir, and Koraput, which were considered as the poverty trap of our country. Is still considered as one of the worst areas in terms of poverty that our country has. So whether this kind of, and at the same time, if we see the coastal areas of our country, of Andhra, of Tamil Nadu, of Kerala, of Karnataka, of Bengal, of Gujarat, or of Mumbai, coastal areas are experiencing a serious threat to biodiversity with increase of the sea level. That how the entire, because it's not that we say, if I'm sitting in Uttar Pradesh and I say no, coastal area damage will have no impact on me, I think I'm very novice, I'm very innocent, or I'm immature. Because if the economies are deeply connected, economy one of India with other countries, but also in terms of coastal areas damage is not my damage. This argument is not, I think, is not acceptable, and no one gives it. But just to highlight it, or if I say the Himalayan economy is being damaged or is being impacted upon by climate change, so it will have no impact on areas of plain areas of non-Himalayan economy. So because then I think we need to develop a very regional and ecologically enabled economic development of growth. This is what I understand. So we can't have just an all India macro framework of growth with just GDP or these per capita income framework or demand and supply framework, keeping in mind. We need to develop ecologically enabled economic model of growth. This is what I understand is one of the biggest challenges that our country that has to face. If we won't develop ecologically specific developmental models, I think we are going to have serious damage both to our environment as well as to our economy in coming future. In terms of social challenges, I think there is an increase in this concept of individualism. For political science teachers, all of us are teachers here. For political science teachers, I don't have to go into detail about individualism. And individualism here is not as exactly as we considered of Locke, of liberalism. But individualism here we consider, means I consider is, or in simple terms, as I put it, as me generation. And me generation is nothing wrong in this. And me generation, this is also something which is a greater impact on individual of globalization. That how globalization has impact on personality development of individuals. So individual as citizen, individual as human being, individual as a social product. So this me generation has greater impact, but this me generation is what I see, and globally has been proved by many studies, is highly socially conscious. Socially conscious for their environment. See the entire environmental movement led by Greta Thunberg, just a teenager. And she had greater impact, greater global impact. More, of course, more in the countries of North than in the countries of South. And she is just a teenager. So this generation is definitely a me generation, but very, very highly socially conscious generation. And third characteristic of this generation is that of new aspirations. This me generation, a socially conscious generation, has new aspirations. And these new aspirations are not the conventional aspirations, the traditional aspirations that, say, people of my generation that we had. If just purely, if I put it, we were just thinking for a job, for a government job, for a secure job, for a happy, harmonious life. If these were the simple generation aspirations, basic aspirations, but this generation, the current generation, that may have a different kind of aspirations. Startups, web business, this web portal thing, globally connected. Idea, business of ideas, exchange of ideas. It may be a very motivational generation, or a group of people, maybe for music, for art, for culture, for literature. New generations are having new aspirations. And this brings to my third point of this challenge, the developmental challenge. There's these new aspirations are not being fully understood or addressed by the old institutions, and I'll come to that. That is the second challenge that I've worked upon. That old institutions, and when I say institutions, I include state, I include market, and I include society. Institutions of society, like family, peer group, and others. So these old institutions, they are not able to, they are, in some societies, they have failed as well. So they are not able to capture their imagination, and they are not able to address their imagination, the new generation imagination, their new aspirations, and their urge for social change. So this is a very complex situation, that we have a new, and as we say that India has a demographic dividend, but this demographic dividend is a very new type of dividend. It's not only in terms of age, a young country, but in terms of minds and ideas and imagination. There's a very new type of demographic dividend, and then our institutions are not able to capture their. It is also failing in its policy devices. The second challenge that I considered is that of the political agencies. And this is the connected one with the first one, as I simply just said, that is state, the role of a state, the role of market, and the role of society. That how a state is able to capture this imagination of new generation. Because now, who are the productive force in terms of developmental discourse? The productive force is this new dividend, and new dividend with new aspirations. And how a state is addressing their needs, and whether a state is able to understand that how they have to devise the new policies, the new mechanisms, and new institutions to address these. Market somewhat has I'll say the global market is trying to address these, but this global market is largely an equitable, not a fair play or level playing field. So how our domestic market, that is more level playing and more equitable market, that is another challenge before us. And how, as a society, as an Indian society, how we are able to address these challenges. Now, 25 years, this is about the 75 years. Ahead of 25 years, as I see that, which are the major areas of concerns that we need to focus upon. I think I've just listed around 6. The first and foremost area that I considered is the sanctity and principles of constitutionalism. This is something very that how, when we just discussed India at 100, that how we are able to do a stock taking of principles of constitutionalism, that how we implement our constitution, how we adhere to the principles of constitution, and how we are able to translate, especially the directive principles of the state policy of our constitution, which are to me, are core of developmentalism. The directive principles of state policy are the core of the entire discourse of developmentalism, that how we are able to just showcase us in next 25 years. The second is the protection of vulnerables. Of course, it is covered with constitutionalism, but by vulnerable, I am not saying vulnerable, these now very conventional stereotype of vulnerables, as we say, Dalits, Adivasis, vulnerables. But the new type of vulnerables, the socially distressed, the economically distressed vulnerables, the culturally, the psychologically distressed vulnerable. So whether we are able to take this canvas, the very, very big canvas of vulnerability, that because with this new volatility, the new kind of vulnerability that is also coming up, these are structural vulnerability that I just mentioned, Dalit, Adivasis, women, children. These are, of course, structural vulnerability, but there are other vulnerabilities which are coming up. So how both state market, they are able to take care of that. Of course, the freedom I have covered in the opening remarks of this lecture, that how freedom is considered as development. And I'm sure all of you have gone through this concept of freedom as development, so I won't explain much about it. The fourth that I consider is the entire discourse of rights and responsibilities. So rights are actually a very, what we say, a permanent preoccupation of political scientists. And rights, of course, when we say with the state, we have these rights, but the scope of rights, that is also being expanded with globalization. That how much scope? Now, there are several debates. When I say clean air in Delhi is my right, so clean air, with Delhi pollution, everyone is aware of Delhi pollution. So clean air is my right, clean water is my right, other than only my fundamental right of freedom of expression. So the scope, the expanded scope of the discourse of right, and it is expanding with globalization, with international solidarity, with economic integration, the scope. So whether Indian state or Indian society is ready to expand and amicably adjust the scope of rights and responsibility. The fifth challenge, which is again I consider as the fundamental challenge, which has been a challenge throughout immediately after independence, that is the challenge of governance. That how we, and governance, I am saying not in the stereotypical manner, but governance which has at least 4 core areas, that how in our economy, how public sector management that is being organized with the principles of capacity and efficiency, how we are going to ensure accountability, which mechanisms that we are developing accountability of public offices. And third important, which is deeply connected with globalization and development, that how we are able to develop legal framework for development. Now, this is very crucial. I just want to elucidate this, that how legal framework for development. When we say some developmental project has to come, say for instance a port or a special economic zone or some factory, some manufacturing unit, and of course this will come with some element of displacement and damage to environment. There is no disagreement on it. So how we are going to ensure that there is a legal framework? One is the social framework, or second is the political framework. How there is a legal framework to ensure justice and equality for both the developmental need as well as the damages and displacement, both to the habitant as well as to the environment. So whether we are able to handle this balance, to first to recognize it, and second to develop a framework, and third how efficiently we implement it. And fourth, certainly, is the biggest challenge of information and transparency, that how with this new type of communication, new type of new social media, that how when this information is being disseminated so rapidly within minutes, within seconds, and even the authenticity of information is difficult to ascertain, then how this is being regulated, or this is being I won't say controlled, but how this is being regulated and monitored, that is another important challenge. And this brings me finally to the last important challenge vis-a-vis globalization and development that I considered, is that how we build a cosmopolitanism world for ourselves. And that how cosmopolitanism, again, I won't go in detail because everyone is a political science teacher here, but cosmopolitanism, of course, one in the sense of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, but also second in more in terms of, say, Taylorian concept of cosmopolitanism, where is a deep sense of conscious citizenry with mutual respect, and having two major principles of operation. One is the principle of human dignity, and second, the principle of equality. That how, and these are universally recognized and accepted, that how the principle of human dignity and the principle of equality, they would be governed. I think these are the challenges that we need to address in next coming 25 years. But this is how I see. I'll stop here. We may devote some time for question answers if there. Thank you very much.
बढ़िया रहा सर लेक्चर आपका सर, बहुत बढ़िया सर, धन्यवाद सर।
मैं इसको थोड़ा सा हिंदी में चाहे तो बता सकता हूँ, या सब समझ में आ गया हो?
हिंदी में बताइए थोड़ा सा।
यदि सब साथियों को जरूरत लगती है तो मैं हिंदी में बताऊं थोड़ा सा।
जी सर, हिंदी में थोड़ा सा बताइए।
जी सर, हिंदी में बताएं सर।
जी बताता हूँ, थोड़ा पानी पी लेता हूँ एक घूंट।
हाँ सर, हिंदी में जरूर से बता दीजिए।
जी सर,
ठीक है सर।
कोई तब तक बीच में कुछ यदि सवाल हो या कोई कमेंट करना चाहे तो मैं उसको हिंदी वाले अपने उसमें कवर कर लूंगा, कोई साथी यदि मुझसे बताना चाहते हैं तो। कोई
सर गुड इवनिंग सर, गुड इवनिंग।
हिंदी में ही कवर कर लूंगा उसको।
गुड इवनिंग सर।
Especially those who are coming from South India, if they want to just say something or have some questions, so I like to respond to those, and while doing my Hindi version, I like to do that.
Good evening sir, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much sir for such a wonderful session.
Thank you.
I'm Irfanul Haq from Department of Political Science, AMU. Sir, you were talking about the globalization and development. I was just trying to understand the concept of the development you were talking about. I just want to know from your good self that we are talking about the development at the same time. We are talking about the sustainable development.
Yeah.
Sir, what is your opinion about the international hegemony that we are having and we are facing from the developed world regarding the development and pressurizing India in its pace with the development process?
Yeah. On development. Yeah. Good.
Yes,
Very
thank you,
nice.
sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very important input, and I won't call it a question, but very important input, which we need to address together. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome. Some more?
Yes, sir. I want to ask you a question. My name is Ejaz Man.
Ji Himanshu. Ji.
I just want. So I just wanted to ask it that why do you find the challenge of, or why do you find the economic development that India has witnessed in collaboration with the global development that has happened? Why do you find the consequence of emergence of subaltern studies in that particular aspect? Subaltern studies, particularly led by Ranjit Goha in India. Why do you find that between the developmentalism that you talked about and the emergence of subaltern studies?
No, I certainly find linkages, but can you just explain your question a bit more?
I just want to know that how, in your view, the developmentalism, the debate of developmentalism in India has basically led to the growth of subaltern studies in India. Is it directly linked to it, or there are any other aspects or dimensions?
Okay. Yeah, got it. Yeah, got it.
सर एक क्वेश्चन मेरा भी है सर, एक प्रश्न मेरा भी है.
Yeah.
Sir, I have a
सर एक
question.
प्रश्न मेरा भी है सर, डॉक्टर नीरज सारवाल उज्जैन से.
Yeah.
सर जिस तरीके से सर चीन का प्रभाव बढ़ रहा है कई देशों की अर्थव्यवस्था पर, उसका कब्जा हो गया, तो ये इससे ऐसा नहीं लगता कि ये वैश्वीकरण का दुष्परिणाम है?
Okay.
Sir, one question from my side. What is the difference between finance capitalism, as we see during British colonial rule in India, and globalization?
Finance capital, eh?
Yeah, finance colonialism or capitalism, we can say that we are studying in 3 stages of colonialism. The last stage is finance colonialism. And what is the difference between finance colonialism and this globalization?
Okay.
Sir,
Yeah.
Sir,
Yeah, Pranam.
hello. The question is that how has COVID-19 affected the process of globalization as far as India is concerned?
Yeah, very.
Me in the previous. Sir, very nice. Yes.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining.
सर नमस्कार.
नमस्कार.
मेरा एक क्वेश्चन था कि ग्लोबल मीडिया हम जैसे शब्द वो सुनते हैं, लेकिन यहाँ जितने भी प्रकार की मैंने पश्चिम की मीडिया हो या एशियन या अफ्रीकन मीडिया या भारत की मीडिया को हम देखें तो ग्लोबल मीडिया पूरे परिप्रेक्ष्य में देखें तो मुझे कोई भी नजर नहीं आता. सबके अपने अपने इशू, अपने अपने कंट्रीज के उनके वो जो उसका प्रभाव पूरी दुनिया पे उत्पन्न करना रहता है, वो उसको लेकर चलते. तो हम ग्लोबल मीडिया शब्द से तो मुझे आपत्ति है सर.
Okay, nice question. I'll try to clarify it.
जी सर.
या
सर
आपकी आपत्ति शायद कुछ कम हो जाएगी.
हेलो सर, अब श्रीकांत सर बोल रहे हैं. हेलो.
Yeah.
You proceed.
One by one. Don't worry, I am not in a hurry. If you people are ready to sit for another 15-20 minutes, so I can just take many questions and respond to all.
Yeah, we are fine with it, sir.
Okay, but depending upon the moderator or the whosoever is there, no? Okay.
Actually,
yeah, go ahead.
Sir, one observation, or you can say that it is very immature or naive for me to say. But sir, when you are discussing, when you are mentioning the new yeah, there is a kind of very crazy, or new generation is being very crazy, or sort of they seem very interested in startups. But sir, though I come from a middle class, so what I feel, what personally, and with having a good rapport or good interaction with my other friends, I feel that people still want to have a government job. So it can be due to the reasons, since the government job is vanishing, or there is a dearth or paucity of jobs. That is why people are rushing towards startups, because in many startup videos we saw that it is due to they didn't find a good government job. That is why they started chai wala or MBA chai wali or what sort of these things. So it is just my observation, sir. It is not in contradiction with what you said.
No. It doesn't matter even if it is in contradiction. I always welcome. It won't be contradiction. It will be contestation. It's okay. But this is a very
ये यहाँ पे कामगारों की मूवमेंट, श्रमिकों की मूवमेंट चलती थी, बाकी की मूवमेंट चलती थी। ये मूवमेंट्स के ऊपर में इसका क्या, ये जो आंदोलन हम जिसको बोलते हैं, ये इस आंदोलन का क्या भविष्य रहेगा? इस बड़ी बड़ी लीडरशिप निर्माण होती थी, तो उसका क्या भविष्य रहेगा ग्लोबलाइजेशन के इसमें?
Yeah, very nice. And from Nagpur, there have been many movements. Shetkari Sangathan movement, you remember? The very famous one. Yeah,
Yes,
I know.
yes.
Okay, so I think that's a lot for 15-20 minutes, as well as with Hindi version. And I'll try to cover this in my Hindi version as well. But for my Hindi speaking friends, मैं थोड़ा सा हिंदी में बोल देता हूँ, और उसका मैं एक क्रक्स बताने की कोशिश करता हूं कि वैश्वीकरण का जो पूरा संदर्भ है वो विकसित और विकासशील देशों में उसका अलग अलग मतलब समझा गया है। वैश्वीकरण हालांकि बहुत ही सामान्य भाषा में भी समझा जाता है, और आमतौर से उसको भूमंडलीकरण या वैश्वीकरण जैसे शब्दों का प्रयोग किया जाता है। लेकिन पिछले लगभग 60-70 सालों से वैश्वीकरण के विमर्श में बहुत सारा अकादमिक और बहुत सारा बौद्धिक काम हुआ है। एक लोग मानने वाले, एक पक्ष के लोग मानने वाले ये कहते हैं कि वैश्वीकरण कोई नई प्रक्रिया नहीं है, लेकिन ये सभी मानते हैं कि वैश्वीकरण कोई एक घटना नहीं है, वैश्वीकरण एक प्रक्रिया है। और एक पक्ष ये मानता है कि बहुत नई प्रक्रिया नहीं है, ये सदियों से चलती आ रही है और ये मुख्यतः व्यापार आधारित प्रक्रिया है। इसमें मुख्यतः व्यापार पर काम होता है। और इसका सबसे पुराना उदाहरण लोग सिल्क रूट का या दूसरी जगहों का देते हैं, जो इंडो ग्रीक ट्रेड का देते हैं, सिल्क रूट का देते हैं। तो ये दो तीन इंडो सीरियन का देते हैं। इसका बहुत पुराना उदाहरण, लेकिन वो मुख्यतः व्यापार आधारित प्रक्रियाओं पर ही उदाहरण है। हालांकि उसमें बहुत सारे एंथ्रोपोलॉजिकल स्टडीज ये बताते हैं कि उनके बहुत सारे कल्चर, बहुत सारे रिचुअल्स का भी आदान प्रदान हुआ, लेकिन उसकी एक भूमिका बहुत सीमित स्तर पर मानी जाती है, और खासतौर से उसको विकास और मानवीय विकास में बहुत महत्वपूर्ण हो सकती है, लेकिन उसका कोई आर्थिक और वैसा भौगोलिक विकास हुआ हो उसमें उसको उतना नहीं देखा गया है अभी तक। लेकिन जो दूसरा स्कूल है वो मानते हैं, और मुझे लगता है किसी एक साथी ने अभी बात भी उठाई कि फाइनेंस कॉलोनियलिज्म या कैपिटलिज्म और ग्लोबलाइजेशन, ये उसी से जुड़ा हुआ सवाल है कि इनमें क्या मतलब कुछ अंतर है या समानता है। तो इसको भी समझना होगा कि सबसे पहले तो ये समझना जरूरी है कि पिछले 200-250 वर्ष का जो वैश्वीकरण का इतिहास है वो मुख्यतः आर्थिक रहा है, और आर्थिक के साथ साथ उसका राजनीतिक और उसका सांस्कृतिक पहलू तो रहा ही है। लेकिन वो आर्थिक आज के दृष्टिकोण में नहीं रहा है, आज के नजरिए से नहीं रहा है, वो आर्थिक कॉलोनियलिज्म के नजरिए से रहा है। कि और कॉलोनियलिज्म का जो सबसे महत्वपूर्ण, यदि हम कहें कि कॉलोनियलिज्म की एक मुख्य बात बताई जाए तो कॉलोनियलिज्म की सीधी बात ये थी कि व्यापार के माध्यम से किसी भी भूभाग पर नियंत्रण स्थापित करना। यदि मुझसे कहा जाए तो मैं यही कहूंगा दैट कंट्रोल ओवर वंस टेरिटरी थ्रू ट्रेड, कि उसके मतलब भूमि पर एक्चुअल नियंत्रण स्थापित करना, यही अंतर है। एक्चुअल में आकर जैसे अंग्रेज हमारे देश में आकर बैठ गए, तो इसलिए इस बात को समझने की जरूरत कि जो टेरिटोरियल इंटीग्रिटी थी, वो टेरिटोरियल इंटीग्रिटी को, जस्ट अ मोमेंट, सो सॉरी शायद कवर हो गया। सो टेरिटोरियल कंट्रोल थ्रू ट्रेड, ये कॉलोनियलिज्म का, लेकिन उस ट्रेड के साथ में जो कॉलोनियल मास्टर्स थे उनका ये पक्ष रहता था कि हम तो, जैसे व्हाइट मैन्स बर्डन थ्योरी है, वो पूरा नैरेटिव था कि किस तरीके से हमने आपको सभ्य किया है और आप, लेकिन हालांकि उसका सच्चाई तो अब पिछले 100 सालों की स्टडीज में आ चुकी है कि उसकी सच्चाई क्या थी, व्हाइट मैन्स बर्डन थ्योरी की सच्चाई क्या थी। तो लेकिन आज के जो डिफरेंस है, जो पूछा रहा था, लेकिन वो आदान प्रदान कम से कम इतना निश्चित था कि वो 3 चीजों से अलग था। पहला, वो आदान प्रदान किसी भी प्रकार से मुक्त आदान प्रदान नहीं था। इट वॉज नॉट ट्रेड, इट वॉज ट्रेड बिटवीन, जैसे स्लेव ट्रेड भी पुराने जमाने में होता था ना, तो इट वॉज ए ट्रेड बिटवीन द मास्टर्स एंड द स्लेव्स, so under the disguise of colonialism. The second, it was trade of a colony, between the colony which was controlled by the masters to the, and diverting or draining out masters economy, वो उसका दूसरा पहलू हो रहा था। तो and the third, it was not based on any principle of equality. तो ये कोई इक्वल ट्रेड नहीं था, इट वॉज जस्ट वन साइड ट्रेड गिविंग नो हु इज एक्चुअली ड्रेनिंग आउट द रिसोर्सेस। आज का ट्रेड, आज का ग्लोबलाइजेशन में ट्रेड इज द कॉमन थिंग। व्यापार जो है वो कॉमनैलिटी है, लेकिन वो व्यापार, यदि भारत भी कहता है कि हमें यूरोपियन यूनियन मार्केट की एक्सेस मिले, जबकि यूरोपियन यूनियन मार्केट कहता है, यदि WTO में वो कह रहा है कि हम आपके इंडिया मार्केट की एक्सेस चाहते हैं फॉर सर्टेन कमोडिटीज और फॉर एक्स बाई कमोडिटीज, तो वो ये कह रहा है कि हमको उसकी एक्सेस मिले, तो हमको भी आपके मार्केट की एक्सेस चाहिए, या हम आपको अपनी मार्केट की एक्सेस दे रहे हैं तो हम किन किन शर्तों पर आधारित एक्सेस दे रहे हैं। अभी भी हम बहुत सारी चीजों पर, स्पेशली जब WTO हमने साइन किया तो हम बहुत सारी चीजों पर बहस करते रहे, लेकिन कम से कम ऑन एग्रीकल्चर ऑन इकोनॉमी, ऑन एग्रीकल्चर ऑफ इकोनॉमी पर हम ट्रेड ऑन एग्रीकल्चर पर जो था उस पर हम बहुत सारी बातें अपनी मनवाने में कामयाब रहे WTO में। पूरी बातें मनवाने में कामयाब नहीं रहे, तो कम से कम निगोसिएशन, जो फाइनेंस कॉलोनियलिज्म में देयर वाज नो निगोसिएशन, here there is a scope and there have been many negotiations, तो हम कम से कम समझौता कर रहे हैं, लेकिन समझौता हम कुछ शर्तों के साथ, कोई जरूरी नहीं है कि वो समझौता हमेशा समानता पर आधारित समझौता हो, बट एटलीस्ट नाउ वी हैव पावर ऑफ निगोसिएशन, हमारे पास कुछ भी निगोशिएशन करने की शक्ति है एज सॉवरेन कंट्री। दूसरा जो महत्वपूर्ण विभेद है, दूसरा जो महत्वपूर्ण अंतर है वो कि अब फाइनेंस कॉलोनियलिज्म में टेरिटोरियल कंट्रोल कॉलोनियल मास्टर्स के पास ही था, अब वो कंट्रोल नहीं है, एक्सेस टू मार्केट एंड टेरिटोरियल में अंतर है। तो एक्चुअल कंट्रोल और इंडियन टेरिटरी वो फाइनेंस कैपिटल का नहीं है, वो कहीं भी नहीं है अब उस तरीके से। कहीं कहीं हो रहा है। किसी साथी ने चाइना का सवाल पूछा कि चाइना अफ्रीका में बहुत सारी, नहीं अच्छा उसने पूछा कि चाइना का रोल बढ़ा है, लेकिन चाइना अफ्रीका में बहुत सारी टेरिटरीज पर कंट्रोल भी कर रहा है थ्रू फाइनेंस कैपिटलिज्म। अभी प्रोसेस ये चल रहा है। तो वो एक अजीब अलग किस्म का ग्लोबलाइजेशन का फेज वहां पर थ्रू चाइनीज कंपनीज हो रहा है, वो भी फाइनेंस कैपिटलिज्म ही हो रहा है। तो एक तो बात ये रही। दूसरा, ग्लोबलाइजेशन को नॉलेज शेयरिंग पर्टिकुलरली विद R&D रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट में भी बहुत देखा गया है, जहां पर हम टेक्नोलॉजी का नॉलेज शेयरिंग और जहां पर हम दूसरी चीजों का नॉलेज शेयरिंग करते हैं। तीसरा इसी से जुड़ा हुआ सवाल किसी साथी ने नागपुर से पूछा कि कामगार संगठनों का आंदोलन जो था उस पर असर क्या पड़ा है ग्लोबलाइजेशन का, वो इसी से जुड़ा हुआ है। आपको याद होगा कि 2000 के दशक में पूरी दुनिया के आंदोलनों में एक बहुत सारी सॉलिडारिटी हुई थी, जिसमें एक दूसरी प्रक्रिया भी चली थी जो वर्ल्ड सोशल फोरम के नाम से जानी जाती थी, जिसमें दुनिया के सारे सामाजिक आंदोलनों का एक प्रकार का सॉलिडारिटी, एक प्रकार का उनके अंदर समावेश हो रहा था। और उनके अंदर ये लग, क्योंकि उनका सिद्धांत क्या था, उनको जुड़ने का सिद्धांत क्या था? उनका मूल जुड़ने का सिद्धांत ये था कि जो नव उदारवादी नीतियां हैं वो मूलतः असमानता पर आधारित हैं। तो इस असमानता और ये नव उदारवादी नीतियां ये दुनिया के सभी देशों में हैं, ये ब्राजील में और खासतौर से ब्रिक्स कंट्री में तो थी ही, अभी भी है। तो इन जितने भी जो ब्रिक्स इकोनॉमी है, ब्रिक्स कंट्री है, उसके अंदर इन चीजों को ध्यान में रखते हुए जरूरी है कि इनके बरक्स एक नया प्रतिमान तय किया जाए, एक नया काउंटर तय किया जाए, और इसके लिए बहुत सारे आंदोलनों की सहभागिता हुई और उसका बहुत सारा असर भी पड़ा। अभी के दौर में यदि मैं कहूं, जैसे थोड़ा सा क्लाइमेट चेंज पर टच अपॉन किया था कि क्लाइमेट चेंज से जुड़े हुए आंदोलन दुनिया में बहुत भारी तरीके से पूरी दुनिया को जोड़ने के लिए, पूरी दुनिया के आंदोलनों को जोड़ने के लिए एक बहुत बड़ा प्लेटफॉर्म साबित हो चुके हैं। तो ये नहीं कि क्लाइमेट चेंज का आंदोलन यदि अफ्रीका में पड़ रहा है तो अफ्रीका से ही उसका असर है, या एशिया में पड़ रहा है तो एशिया में उसका असर है, या लैटिन अमेरिका में पड़ रहा है। तो इसलिए आंदोलनों की एक समान जमीन वो ग्लोबलाइजेशन ने तैयार की है, लेकिन वो तैयार करने में सिर्फ वो वाले आंदोलनों में की है जिसका असर यूनिवर्सल हो, जैसे कि क्लाइमेट चेंज, जैसे कि सारे असमानता के विरुद्ध आंदोलन, जैसा कि महिला समानता के लिए आंदोलन। तो ये चूंकि ये यूनिवर्सल क्षेत्र हैं, ये कोई लेकिन यदि हम कहें कि हमारे क्षेत्र में कोई एक पर्टिकुलर हमारे एरिया का वो हो, उसका हो सकता है कोई यूनिवर्सल इम्पैक्ट ना हो, तो वहां पर उसकी लोकल नीतियां ही अपनानी पड़ेंगी। उन नीतियों का विस्तार हो सकता है, ग्लोबलाइजेशन मदद करे या उनके खिलाफ भी जा सकता है। कोई जरूरी नहीं ग्लोबलाइजेशन हमेशा मदद करने वाला ही प्रक्रिया है, उनके खिलाफ भी जा सकता है कि वो पूरी दुनिया में एक ऐसा नैरेटिव खड़ा कर दे कि उस कम्युनिटी के खिलाफ ही पूरा नैरेटिव बन जाए। ग्लोबल मीडिया पर भी मैं आता हूं कि उसके माध्यम से वो ये कर दे कि वो पूरे खिलाफ उसके बन जाए। तो ये मुझे लगता है आंदोलन की स्थिति रही। इसी तरह से मैं जो विकास के क्रम की ट्रेजेक्टरी को समझता हूं, उसमें समझता हूं कि 1950, 1940, 50, 60 के दशक में जो डीकोलोनाइजेशन की प्रक्रिया चली और साथ ही साथ उन सारी देशों की आर्थिक पुनरुद्धार की प्रक्रिया चली, वो बहुत चुनौतीपूर्ण थी। ये उससे भी ज्यादा और जटिल हो गई जब बीच में कोल्ड वॉर, लगभग 40 साल तक कोल्ड वॉर का असर भी इन देशों पर पड़ा रहा। और उसी में भारत के क्रम को रखता हूं कि भारत ने इस बीच में जब आजादी पाई तो भारत को एक बहुत ही विभाजित आजादी मिली थी। भारत कोई अखंड आजादी नहीं मिली थी, भारत को विभाजित आजादी मिली थी। और भारत उस विभाजित आजादी के साथ साथ ही भारत में दुनिया अब तक की मनुष्यता के सबसे खतरनाक सांप्रदायिक दंगों से गुजरकर भारत निकल कर आया। आज 75 साल के बाद हम जब पलट कर देखते हैं तो उस खतरनाक उस सांप्रदायिक दंगों की याद से अभी भी सिहर जाते हैं। तो इन चीजों को ध्यान में रखते हुए भारत के सामने कम से कम 3 स्तर पर चुनौतियां थी 1950 के समय पर, कि भारत की अपनी जो भौगोलिक अखंडता है उसको बचाना, भारत का जो सामाजिक ताना बाना है इन सांप्रदायिक दंगों के बीच में उसको बचाना, और तीसरा भारत का आर्थिक विकास करना। एक कॉलोनियल देश का इमीडिएटली वो उसके सामने आर्थिक विकास करना, और 2-3 किस प्रकार से खाद्यान्न के क्षेत्र में आत्मनिर्भरता पाए, और खाद्यान्न के बाद हम कैसे पोषण के क्षेत्र में भी हम आत्मनिर्भरता पाए। ये 2 उदाहरण, और ऐसे कई सारे उदाहरण हैं, हम सब लोग जानते हैं, तो इसलिए मैंने उसको बहुत नहीं छुआ है। दूसरी चुनौती जो हमारे सामने उस समय थी और भारत ने एक देश के बतौर काम किया, वो था कि भारत के अंदर सत्ता का तंत्र क्या होगा। तो भारत ने, जानते हैं कि भारत ने कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल डेमोक्रेसी को अपनाया है, और ये 75 वर्षों से हम बहुत सफलतापूर्व के तरीके से हम इसका प्रयोग कर रहे हैं। तो वो हमारे सामने एक बहुत बड़ी चुनौती थी, जबकि हम उसके इर्द गिर्द और बहुत सारे देश देखते हैं तो वो चीजें नहीं पाई जाती हैं। और तीसरा, चूंकि और वो चुनौती है, तो सेकुलरिज्म में नैरो सेंस में नहीं कह रहा हूं कि हमारे लिए सारे धर्मों का हम सम्मान करते हैं। सेकुलरिज्म का एक ब्रॉड मीनिंग है, रिलीजन, तो वो वाला भी नहीं है। लेकिन चूंकि भारत वो इतना बिल्ट सांप्रदायिक दंगे से निकल कर आगे, लेकिन ये हमेशा चूंकि हमारे समाज की, हमारे समाज का ताना बाना इस प्रकार है कि ये चुनौती हमारे सामने आने वाले और 25 वर्ष, आने वाले और 100 वर्ष, 200 वर्ष बनी रहेगी, क्योंकि हम इतनी विविधताओं से भरे पूर्ण, इतने हम रिच कंट्री हैं हर क्षेत्र में, तो ये चुनौती हमारे सामने निकल कर आती है। तो इस प्रकार से मैंने कोशिश की, और उसी में थोड़ा सा मीडिया के भूमिका को भी बताने की कोशिश की। और मीडिया में ही साथी ने एक सवाल पूछा है कि ग्लोबल मीडिया से उनको एक समस्या है, क्योंकि वो तो सब लोकल करते हैं। देखिए साथी, जो ग्लोबल मीडिया का यहाँ पर मतलब हम लोग समझते हैं, वो ग्लोबल मीडिया की ओनरशिप से समझते हैं। ग्लोबल मीडिया के एजेंडा अलग चीज है और ओनरशिप अलग चीज है, कि ग्लोबल मीडिया को गवर्न कौन कर रहा है, उसकी ओनरशिप किसके पास है। यदि हम सोशल मीडिया में हम बात कर रहे हैं, तो उसमें हम एलन मस्क की बात करें, तो ट्विटर का एजेंडा हो सकता है भारत में, उत्तर प्रदेश के प्रयागराज में एक अलग तरीके से हम वो, ये ट्विटर का एजेंडा नहीं है, लेकिन ट्विटर का कंट्रोल, ओनरशिप, वो ग्लोबल ओनरशिप है। तो ग्लोबल मीडिया का यहाँ सेंस उन ग्लोबल हाउसेस से है, मीडिया हाउसेस से है, जिनकी ओनरशिप ग्लोबल कॉरपोरेट्स के हाथ में है। तो उसको मतलब डेफिनेशन वाइज हम उसको ग्लोबल मीडिया मानते हैं। उसके इश्यूज तो लोकल होंगे ही। प्रयागराज में वो तो चूंकि इश्यूज उठाने वाले ओनर्स नहीं हैं, ओनर्स एक लार्जर एजेंडा सेट कर सकते हैं, लेकिन जनता ही ट्विटर पर कमेंट करेगी ना, जनता ही ट्विटर पर शेयर कर रही है। तो प्रयागराज की जनता अलग करेगी, वॉशिंगटन की अलग करेगी, और नायरोबी की अलग करेगी, और बैंकॉक की अलग करेगी, लेकिन प्लेटफॉर्म एक ही है, प्लेटफॉर्म ट्विटर ही है। तो हम लोग इसको इस दृष्टिकोण से समझते हैं ग्लोबल मीडिया का मतलब, वो चाहे फेसबुक हो, चाहे न्यू सोशल मीडिया पर्टिकुलरली। और एक समय पर इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया, ये टेलीविजन वगैरह भी थे, जहां पर जब रूपर मर्डॉक थे, स्टार वो उसका अपना एक बहुत बड़ा पूरा ग्लोबल चैनल था, तो उस भूमिका को मैंने थोड़ी सी वो की थी। और उसी में मुझे लगता है कि 3-4 चैलेंजेस आने वाले 25 वर्षों के लिए हमारे देश की विकास के क्रम में, विकास और भूमंडलीकरण के क्रम में महत्वपूर्ण है। इसमें मैं समझता हूं कि जो पूरा बहस, ये ग्रोथ की हिंदी, पूरी बहस मतलब ग्रोथ वर्सेस पर्यावरण, हाँ, तो कि वो क्या है कि हमारी आवश्यकता है, निश्चित तौर से हमारी आवश्यकता है, हाँ, लेकिन पर्यावरण के हमारे जो सरोकार हैं उसके संकट जो हैं उनको ध्यान में रखते हुए है। और वहां मेरा ये मानना है कि हम ये इकोलॉजिकली इनेबल्ड पॉलिसीज फ्रेमवर्क बनाते हैं तो शायद हम ज्यादा सफलतापूर्वक हम दोनों काम कर सकते हैं, अपनी ग्रोथ भी हम निश्चित कर सकते हैं और पर्यावरण के डैमेज भी कम कर सकते हैं, बशर्ते इसके कि हम एक बहुत ऑल इंडिया लेवल का कोई बहुत मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक मॉडल बनाएं। तो इसलिए जरूरी है कि बहुत ही लोकली डिसेंट्रलाइज्ड इकोलॉजिकली इनेबल्ड मॉडल हो जो पर्यावरण स्थानीय पर्यावरण को ध्यान में रखते हुए, जैसे कि हिमालय में कुछ जगह ये प्रयोग हुए हैं, ऐसा नहीं कि हिमालय, क्योंकि हिमालय बहुत फ्रेजाइल जोन है, तो हिमालय में कुछ इस तरीके के इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट के स्टेट के लेवल पर भी प्रयोग हुए हैं और समाज के लेवल पर भी ये प्रयोग हुए हैं। तीसरा मेरा मानना है, और किसी साथी ने ये पूछा कि जो नई जनरेशन है वो तो हर चाहते हैं कि भाई हम गवर्नमेंट जॉब करें, और मैंने कहा नहीं, ये कोई वो वैसा नहीं है। मुद्दा इसका नहीं है कि हम गवर्नमेंट जॉब और सब लोग उसको एस्पायर करते हैं। न्यू एस्पिरेशंस का मतलब ये है कि जो नई डेमोग्राफी है वो उसके अंदर, और स्वाभाविक है ये तो कि जब नया डेमोग्राफिक डिविडेंड होगा उसके अंदर नए विचार होंगे, और नए विचार जबकि इतना दुनिया जब इतनी सिमट गई है, आपके फोन में आ गई है, तो उसमें नए विचार होंगे, तो उन विचारों को एड्रेस करने की क्षमता या विजन जो पॉलिटिकल एजेंसी या सोशल एजेंसीज है, स्टेट मार्केट, ये दो बड़ी एजेंसी है, ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव एजेंसीज हैं, क्या इनके अंदर वो क्षमता है? तभी मैंने कहा कि एक स्कूल का ये मानना है, मतलब खासतौर से डेविड हेल्ड का ये मानना है कि ओल्ड इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैव फेल्ड, कि ये वो फेल कर चुके हैं इनको एड्रेस करने में, इस एस्पिरेशन को एड्रेस करने में। तो ये सिर्फ मेरा कहना का मतलब ये है कि हम किस नॉर्थ इंडिया की बात नहीं कर रहे हैं या नॉर्थ इंडिया के कुछ क्षेत्रों की बात नहीं कर रहे हैं। सरकारी जॉब पाना किसी की भी आजादी है, उसकी एस्पायर करना वो किसी की भी आजादी है, लेकिन हम एक एज एन इकोनॉमी हम क्या क्या ऑफर कर रहे हैं, इम्पोर्टेंट। लेकिन यदि हम ऑफर ही उतना कर रहे हैं, यदि हमने हमारी बास्केट ही इतनी बड़ी नहीं करना चाहती है, वो चुनने की आजादी चाहती है, वो जिसका मन करेगा वो उसकी चुनने की आजादी है कि वो एमबीए चाय वाला बने या एमबीए करके किसी कॉर्पोरेट में मैनेजर बने, ये उसकी आजादी है। लेकिन चूंकि उसको एमबीए कर लिया और कॉम्प्लेक्स बहुत डेलिकेट मामला है कि आपकी बास्केट कितनी बड़ी है, कि समाज ने, मतलब इकोनॉमी ने, स्टेट ने, मार्केट ने आपकी जॉब बास्केट को कितना बड़ा किया है, उसके अंदर कितनी वैरायटीज लाई है। यदि वैरायटीज बिल्कुल लिमिटेड है तब तो बिल्कुल उसके पास कोई चॉइस ही नहीं है, वो वहीं जाएगा। लेकिन यदि बहुत चीज है, यदि उसी में जाना चाहता है, हमारे पास कहा कि हम देख रहे हैं पिछले 20 सालों में हमारा पैक हो रहा है, जा रहा है, तब तो रही थी, लेकिन तो मानना है कि हमारी बात वो बहुत लिमिटेड वैरायटी, कुछ और जबकि हमारी एस्पिरेशंस बहुत है कि वैरायटीज बढ़े, वैराइटीज ऑफ चॉइस। महत्वपूर्ण क्वेश्चन है ये, मेरे क्वेश्चन सिर्फ इतना आसान नहीं है कि हम ये कह देंगे एवरीवन वांट्स अ गवर्नमेंट जॉब। दैट्स हिज और हर चॉइस, प्रोवाइडेड ही और शी हैज मेनी चॉइसेस टू मेक ओवर दिस वन चॉइस। बहुत सारी है तब तो उसकी आजादी है, कुछ भी चुने वो, ठीक है। तो ये हमारे चुनौतियां सामने रही, और उसमें पैटर्न्स में मेरा ये मानना है कि आने वाले जो 25-30 वर्ष हैं उसमें शायद हमारे इंडिया एज अ कंट्री, इंडिया एज अ डेवलपिंग एंड ग्लोबलाइज्ड कंट्री, ये 5-6 चैलेंजेस, चुनौतियां सबसे ज्यादा रहेंगी। संविधानवाद की चुनौतियां रहेंगी कि हम कैसे अपने संविधानवाद को और मजबूत करते हैं, हम कैसे जो हमारी बहुत ही वल्नरेबल आबादियां और क्षेत्र हैं उनकी कैसे सुरक्षा करते हैं, हम कैसे अपने अधिकार और दायित्वों का स्कोप बढ़ाते हैं, उनका अधिकारों का स्कोप बढ़ रहा है, भूमंडलीकरण ने अधिकारों का स्कोप बढ़ाया है। हम उसको कैसे बढ़ाते हैं, हम अपनी सुशासन की जो व्यवस्था है उसको कैसे दुरुस्त करते हैं। दुरुस्त करते हुए, मैं कॉस्मोपॉलिटनिज्म की हिंदी नहीं जानता, मुझे माफ करिएगा, तो कि हम कैसे कॉस्मोपॉलिटनिज्म समाज का हिस्सा बन पाते हैं, इन चीजों को ध्यान में रखने की कोशिश की। इसी में एक साथी ने कहा कि भाई जो सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट है वो इंटरनेशनल हेजेमनी के साथ इंडिया को प्रेशराइज कर रहा है। देखिए, सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट, ये सारी चीजें सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट से ही मैंने संबंधित उठाया है, लेकिन सस्टेनेबल और प्रेशराइज करने की बात इंडिया की रही, और इस पर सबसे बढ़िया जो उदाहरण मैंने अभी दिया था समय पहले, इंडिया ने वो दिया कि कैसे उसकी पोजीशन ऑन यूक्रेन है। दैट इज द बेस्ट एग्जांपल ऑफ इंडियाज डिप्लोमेसी एंड इंडियाज बैलेंस्ड अप्रोच डिस्पाइट ऑफ विदाउट उनकी हेजेमनी पहले भी रही है, उनकी भी रखने की कोशिश करते हैं, लेकिन एज अ सॉवरेन नेशन, एज अ सॉवरेन स्टेट एंड एज इक्वल मैं कोट अनकोट रख रहा हूं, क्योंकि ऑलवेज डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज इक्वल नहीं होते हैं, डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज इंक्लूडिंग इंडिया, क्योंकि पावर एंड इकोनॉमिक डायनामिक्स तो उस तरीके से रहते ही हैं। तो बट सपोजिटली और कॉन्सेप्चुअली इक्वल, जैसे हम यूनाइटेड नेशंस में बोलते हैं कि भाई यूनाइटेड नेशन जनरल असेंबली में नेपाल का वोट भी एक है और यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स का वोट भी एक है, लेकिन हम जानते हैं उसकी वैल्यू अलग है, तो वोट, लेकिन हमारे यहाँ वो वहाँ यूनिवर्सल एडल्ट सफराइज कुछ अलग किस्म का है। तो लेकिन यहाँ जब हम अपनी इंडियन डेमोक्रेसी में हम कहते हैं वन वोट वन वेट, तो वो चाहे कितना रिच आदमी भी वोट डाले, चाहे कितना पुअर आदमी भी वोट डाले, उसका वेट एक ही है। लेकिन इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड में ऐसा नहीं है, तो ये प्रेशर तो रहेंगे ही। मुद्दा ये है कि इंडिया एज ए स्टेट, इंडिया एज ए सॉवरेन स्टेट उन प्रेशर्स को कैसे निगोशिएट करता है, कैसे उनको विधेल्ड करता है और कैसे अपने नेशनल इंटरेस्ट को आगे ले जाकर ले पाता है। और मुझे लगता है कि समय समय पर WTO पर बहुत लंबा निगोशिएशंस चला, और WTO पे बहुत सारी बातें मनवाने में हम कामयाब रहे हैं, ऐसा नहीं है। क्लाइमेट चेंज पर अभी COP27 अभी हो कर रहा है, और क्लाइमेट चेंज में बहुत सारी निगोशिएशंस में हम उसको इफेक्ट करने में कामयाब रहे हैं। अभी उस पर कोई कंसेंसस नहीं पहुंची है, लेकिन हम कामयाब रहे हैं उसमें। एक सवाल किसी साथी ने पूछा कि जो सबऑल्टर्न स्टडीज और सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट का लिंकेजेस क्या है। देखिए, सबऑल्टर्न स्टडीज एक पर्टिकुलर कॉन्टेक्स्ट में डेवलप हुआ था, एंड सबऑल्टर्न स्टडीज वाज लार्जली with this agenda, or with this mindset, or with this approach, not agenda, with this approach I'll call it, वो इसमें हुआ था कि कैसे जो मेन स्ट्रीम हिस्ट्री है उसमें पीपुल्स हिस्ट्री कैसे, और उस हिस्ट्री का मतलब सिर्फ ये नहीं है कि डायनेस्टीज और कौन कब आए, क्या हुआ और ये और इसका राज कब तक रहा, लेकिन पीपुल्स की कल्चर, आर्ट, लिटरेचर, इकोनॉमी, एक्सचेंज, क्यूजीन, ये सब कैसे हम उसको मेन स्ट्रीम बना पाए। और इसका एक बहुत बड़ा लिंकेजेस है सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट से, क्योंकि जितनी भी मेन स्ट्रीम हिस्ट्री है या नॉर्मेटिव हिस्ट्री है जिसको हम लोग बोलते हैं, वो नॉर्मेटिव हिस्ट्री कुड हैव नॉट बीन सस्टेन्ड, कुड हैव नॉट बीन अलाइव्ड without the sustainable development of people's history। इन दोनों का बहुत गहरा रिश्ता है, तो इसमें कोई मुझे कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन नहीं लगता है। हम दोनों को यदि एक साथ पढ़कर देखें कि भाई उसका यदि पीरियड ऐसा हमारा रहा है, और उस समय की आर्टिजन की हिस्ट्री देखें, उस समय के हैंडीक्राफ्ट की हिस्ट्री देखें, तो और दोनों में यदि कनेक्ट है तो तब तो स्पष्ट हो जाएगा कि चंद्रगुप्ता का जो गोल्डन पीरियड, या हम मानते हैं कि भाई वो था, मूलतः वो लोगों के उद्यम से था, लोगों की सस्टेनेबल इकोनॉमी से था। यदि लोगों की इकोनॉमी सस्टेनेबल नहीं है तो राजा की इकोनॉमी कैसे सस्टेनेबल हो सकती थी? तो इसलिए उसका एक बहुत गहरा रिश्ता है। एक सवाल साथी ने पूछा कि कोविड-19 ने डेवलपमेंटल प्रोसेस को इंडिया में इफेक्ट किया है, इम्पैक्ट किया है। कोविड-19 ने इंडिया के डेवलपमेंटल ट्रेजेक्टरी को, अभी तो स्टडीज आने में टाइम लगेगा, लेकिन मोटा मोटी ये मानना है कि उसने इसको कम से कम 2 तरीके से इम्पैक्ट किया है। अभी बहुत ही डीप स्टडीज नहीं है, क्योंकि इट्स टू अर्ली टू से, थोड़ा टाइम जब निकलेगा तब डेटा आएगा और चीजें निकल कर आएंगी। लेकिन इसको 2 क्षेत्रों में तो प्रभावित किया है। कुछ क्षेत्रों में इंडिया ने बहुत अनप्रेसिडेंटेड तरक्की की है, कोविड-19 की वजह से ही, तो उसमें तरक्की की है। इसीलिए मैंने कहा ना, वो जो सेक्टोरल अप्रोच वाली इकोनॉमिक डिजाइन था, उसको समझने की भी जरूरत है। लेकिन ये समझना होगा कि वो क्या सर्विस सेक्टर में ज्यादा की है या मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर में ज्यादा की है, क्योंकि इन दोनों का क्यूमुलेटिव इम्पैक्ट ही इकोनॉमी पर पड़ेगा। एग्रीकल्चर में की है, कोविड में तो सिर्फ एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर ने ही इंडिया को सस्टेन करने में कामयाबी की, जो अभी तक इनिशियल डेटा आया है। अभी तक जो है और आ जाएगा, अभी कुछ महीनों में और नया डेटा आ जाएगा। तो एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर की सस्टेनेबिलिटी ने हमारे ओवरऑल इकोनॉमी को सस्टेन करने में बहुत मदद की है। लेकिन इसको और ऊपर ले जाने के लिए मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर कितना मददगार होगा, सर्विस सेक्टर कितना मददगार होगा, ये अभी आई थिंक इट्स अ बिट अर्ली, डेटा और आ जाए। लेकिन साथ ही साथ निगेटिवली भी इसको इम्पैक्ट किया है। अब वो निगेटिवली हमारे कितने दूरगामी परिणामों तक होगा, ये भी दूर के बाद ही जाकर पता चलेगा। दूर मतलब कुछ साल और हो जाए तब समझ में आएगा। तो कभी कभी डेटा बहुत जल्दी नहीं उसका असर होता है ना, क्योंकि and India is largely an informal economy, informal sector उसका है, बहुत कम ऑर्गेनाइज हम लोग हैं। उसको समझने की जरूरत है कि उसका इम्पैक्ट क्या है। वो मुझे कुछ वर्षों में कुछ इनिशियल प्रिलिमिनरी फाइंडिंग्स आ रही हैं, बट मैं थोड़ा कॉशियस रहूंगा कि मैं एकदम नहीं कहूंगा कि उसका बहुत निगेटिव असर पड़ा है। मैं कहूंगा कि इट्स अ बिट अर्ली टू प्रिडिक्ट सस्टेनेबली उसको कह पाना, क्योंकि अभी हम रीबिल्ड कर सकते हैं। ऐसा नहीं है कि हमारा इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर रीबिल्ड नहीं हो सकता है। इंडिया इज सच अ वर्सेटाइल इकोनॉमी, हमारी इकोनॉमी में इतनी वर्सेटिलिटी है, इतनी वो है कि हम बहुत तेजी से बाउंस बैक भी कर सकते हैं। तो यदि हम बहुत तेजी से नीचे भी गिर रहे हैं तो हम बहुत तेजी से बाउंस बैक भी कर सकते हैं। ऐसा मतलब दिस इज हाउ आई सी। क्योंकि बाउंस बैक हम इसलिए नहीं कर रहे हैं कि कोई पॉलिसी फ्रेमवर्क हमारे पास है। बाउंस बैक हम इसलिए करेंगे क्योंकि हमारी इमीडिएट नेसेसिटी, नीड ही नहीं, नेसेसिटी है। तो इंडिया एज एन इकोनॉमी अपने को, मतलब वो जो डेविड ईस्टन बोलते थे ना कि पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम दे आर द सेल्फ रेगुलेटरी मैकेनिज्म्स। So likewise, our Indian informal economy, not the formal ones, informal economy has in my understanding, I am not an economic student, but largely I am a political economy student. So usme I think we have this self-regulatory mechanism to rebuild ourselves. तो इसका तो ये रहा। मुझे लगता है मैंने सारे सवाल भी ले लिए हैं और हिंदी में भी सबका जवाब दे दिया है। फिर भी कुछ बचता है तो आप लोग बताइए।
जी
ओके,
यस सर। तो यूजीसी एचआरडीसी यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ इलाहाबाद के इस रिफ्रेशर प्रोग्राम डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ पॉलिटिकल साइंस प्रदीप शर्मा सर का बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करते हैं कि उन्होंने ग्लोबलाइजेशन एंड डेवलपमेंट इन इंडिया टॉपिक पर बहुत ही ज्ञान दिया है, इस पर अपनी व्याख्यान लेक्चर दिया है। हम बहुत आभार व्यक्त करते हैं कि सर ने बहुत ही ज्ञानवर्धक और जानकारी दिया है। साथ ही हम इस प्रोग्राम के कोऑर्डिनेटर अनुराधा मैम का भी हम बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करते हैं कि उन्होंने इतना अच्छा प्रोग्राम आयोजन किया है। साथ ही हमें के लिए वोट ऑफ थैंक्स के लिए हिमांशु सर का भी बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करते हैं कि उन्होंने हमें ये मौका दिया। साथ ही हम अपने सभी प्रतिभागी प्राध्यापक साथियों का भी बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करते हैं कि उन्होंने इस प्रोग्राम को बहुत ही अच्छे से और इसको अटेंड कर रहे हैं, इसको बहुत अच्छे से सुन रहे हैं, जानकारी प्राप्त कर रहे हैं। तो हम सभी अपने सभी प्राध्यापक साथियों प्रतिभागियों का भी आभार प्रोग्राम के संचालन में, आयोजन में अपना कीमती समय दे रहे हैं। तो हम सर का बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करते हैं कि सर ऐसे ही फिर अगर ऐसा तो इस तरह से जानकारी देते रहें, आगे भी अगर ऐसा होता है तो हम सर के उसको सुनेंगे निश्चित रूप से। तो हम आप सबका बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करते हैं।
थैंक यू, नमस्ते, थैंक यू,
धन्यवाद।